My father stood on stage at his own retirement party, champagne glass in hand, and called me the biggest failure of his life. He publicly disowned me in front of 200 of our friends, family, and his most respected colleagues. And he smiled while he did it, a cruel, satisfied little smirk I'd seen 1,000 times. But what he didn't know was that my husband was standing in the back of the room, holding a secret that would cost my father his reputation, his legacy, and every single asset to his name. My husband was waiting for this exact moment. To understand the deafening silence that fell over that grand ballroom and the slow, deliberate smile that spread across my husband's face, we have to go back. Not just a few weeks or months. We have to go back to the very beginning, to the foundation of a family that was built to worship one person and tolerate another. You see, in my family, there were only two roles, the star and the shadow. And from the moment I was born, the role of the star was already taken. My father, Jack, was a man who worshipped at the altar of his own image. His entire existence was a carefully curated performance of success. He was a senior executive at a well-known financial firm, and his identity was welded to his title, his country club membership, and the pristine gloss of his imported German sedan. My mother was his loyal stage manager, a woman whose own opinions had long been absorbed into my father's, her purpose reduced to ensuring his spotlight never flickered. And then there was my brother, Kevin, the heir apparent, the golden child. He was a carbon copy of my father in every way that mattered. Handsome, charming, and armed with an effortless confidence that comes from a lifetime of being told you're perfect. He followed my father's exact path, the right prep school, the right Ivy League university, and a coveted job at a prestigious investment bank right out of college. To my father, Kevin wasn't just a son. He was a legacy, a living testament to his own greatness. And then there was me, Sarah, the shadow. I was the quiet one, always with my nose in a book. While Kevin was out playing sports and being the life of every party, I was in my room taking apart old radios or teaching myself to code on our ancient desktop. My interests weren't flashy. They couldn't be displayed in a trophy case or bragged about at a dinner party. They were quiet, complex, and, in my father's eyes, utterly useless. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was the air we breathed. When Kevin turned 16, a brand new BMW with a giant red bow appeared in the driveway. When I turned 16, I was handed the keys to my mom's 10-year-old station wagon. When Kevin declared he'd major in finance, my father threw a lavish party. When I told them I was accepted into a top-tier computer science program, my father just sighed and said, "Well, I suppose there's a living to be made in that. Just don't expect to meet a decent husband in a room full of nerds." Throughout my life, my father introduced me not as his daughter, but as a disclaimer. It was always, "This is my son Kevin, he just made partner at his firm," followed by a proud clap on the back. And then a wave in my direction. "And this is my daughter, Sarah. She works with computers." He'd say "works with computers" like I was a professional dust collector, with a little shrug that seemed to apologize for my existence. I learned to live with the constant low-grade humiliation. I built up a tolerance to it, like a resistance to a slow-acting poison. But the antidote to that poison arrived my junior year of college in the form of a man who didn't see me as a disclaimer. He saw me as a headline. His name was Mike. He was in the business school, but we met in an elective on economic theory. He was brilliant, but unlike my father and brother, his brilliance was quiet, observant, and deeply kind. He wasn't impressed by my family's name or their money. In fact, when he finally met them, he seemed to see right through their polished facade. He was impressed by me. He'd listen for hours as I explained the intricate algorithms I was designing. He'd look at my lines of code and see art, see architecture. He saw the passion my own family had dismissed as a weird hobby. For the first time, I felt seen. We got married a year after graduation in a small ceremony my parents openly called underwhelming. My father pulled me aside at the reception. "I hope you know what you're doing, Sarah," he said. "This man, he doesn't have the drive. I don't see him setting the world on fire." My father, the great judge of character, had made his ruling. What my father couldn't possibly comprehend was that I wasn't interested in marrying someone who would set the world on fire. I was about to do that myself. And Mike, he wasn't just going to watch, he was going to hand me the matches. Right out of college, a professor and I co-founded a small tech startup. It was not glamorous. Our first office was a windowless room, and our diet was mostly instant noodles and cheap coffee. We were working on a highly specialized piece of software, an AI-driven logistics platform that could revolutionize supply chain management. It was incredibly complex, deeply unsexy, and had the potential to be monumentally disruptive. For years, we poured everything into it, every dollar, every waking hour. Mike, who had taken a job as a financial analyst, was our biggest cheerleader and unpaid consultant. He'd come to our office after his own 10-hour workday, help us with financial models, and tell me over and over again, "You've got this, Sarah. This is brilliant." Meanwhile, my own family saw my venture as a continued source of shame. "Is Sarah still tinkering with that little computer project of hers?" my mother would ask on the phone, her voice dripping with pity. My brother once offered to get me a real job at his firm, doing low-level data entry. The condescension was a physical weight I had to carry every day. Then, after 4 years of relentless grinding, it happened. A major international conglomerate caught wind of what we were building. The negotiations were a whirlwind. And then the offer came, an offer that felt like a typo. They were acquiring our company. The price tag had 9 figures. Overnight, Mike and I were wealthy beyond our wildest comprehension. But we told no one. We didn't buy a mansion or a fleet of supercars. We bought a comfortable, modest house in a quiet neighborhood. We traded our old cars for new, reliable, but not extravagant models. We just kept living our lives. The money was never the point. The freedom was. And I knew with absolute certainty that if my family knew about the money, that freedom would be gone. It would become their victory. My father would find a way to take credit for it. "She got that brain from me," he'd say. I couldn't bear the thought. But then a problem came up. My father, in his quest to maintain his image of unflappable success, had been living far beyond his means for years. With retirement looming, Mike discovered through his financial networks that my father was on the verge of a catastrophic collapse. He was about to lose everything: the house, the cars, his reputation. It would be his ultimate humiliation, a public unmasking of his entire life's lie. A part of me, the part that had been hurt for so long, thought, good, let him. But then I thought of my mother. So I talked to Mike. I couldn't just hand them money. My father's pride would never allow it, and it would expose my secret. So Mike, my brilliant, cunning husband, devised a plan. He created a shell corporation, which then set up an anonymous trust. He called it, with biting irony, the Legacy Trust. Through a series of impossibly thick legal and financial firewalls, I funded the trust, and the trust, in turn, began to quietly solve my father's problems. One day, my parents got a letter from their bank saying a private entity had purchased their mortgage and was offering them a new interest-free payment plan. A few weeks later, the leasing company for their cars informed them an anonymous benefactor had paid off their leases in full for the next 5 years. My father, who had been sweating bullets for months, was ecstatic. He never questioned it. His ego was so vast, he just assumed the universe had decided to reward him. He started bragging that his portfolio was having an unbelievable year. In truth, the trust was discreetly funneling money into his accounts, covering his losses. Mike, acting as a representative of the trust, would have occasional phone calls with my father. My dad, completely oblivious, would lecture Mike on investment strategies. "You see, son," he'd say, "it's all about playing the long game." Mike would just reply, "Yes, Jack, I'm taking notes." The irony was our private joke that kept us sane. We were propping up his entire life. The house, the cars, the country club, the designer clothes, all of it paid for by me, by his failure of a daughter. And the more we supported him in secret, the more he disdained me in public. My modest home was a constant source of ridicule. "I don't understand it, Sarah," my father would say, looking around my perfectly nice living room with disgust. "You had all the advantages, and this is what you do with it? It's a starter home." Kevin was even worse. He'd lean against my Toyota and say, "Still driving this thing, huh? Seriously, sis, let me co-sign a loan for you. It's getting embarrassing." They saw my simple life not as a choice, but as confirmation of my mediocrity. They couldn't have been more wrong. It was a choice. It was a shield to protect my peace from their toxic brand of love. But the shield was getting heavy. Then came the announcement of my father's retirement. Of course, it had to be a coronation, a grand, ostentatious celebration of his career. He booked the most expensive ballroom at the fanciest hotel in the city, 200 guests. It was to be the defining event of his life. A few weeks before the party, my mother called. "Sarah, darling," she said in a hushed tone, "your father and I were looking at the catering bill. It's just astronomical. We're a little worried." I took a deep breath. "Don't worry about it, Mom." "But it's so much," she whispered. I looked at Mike, who gave me a subtle nod. "It's being taken care of," I said. "By who?" she asked, confused. "The Legacy Trust. Dad's investments are doing well, right? Consider it a dividend." She sighed in relief. "Oh, thank goodness. Your father would be mortified if we had to scale back." Mortified, the most important word in my family. I hung up the phone with a cold knot in my stomach. I was paying for the party where I knew I'd be paraded as the family jester. Before I tell you what happened when my dad took that stage, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt completely misunderstood by your own family? That sharp pain of being seen as something you're not by the people who are supposed to know you best? If you know what I'm talking about, or if you're just dying to see what happens next, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and like this video. It really helps tell YouTube you want to see more stories about justice being served. Okay, let's get back to the party from hell. The night was exactly as my father envisioned. The ballroom was draped in gold and white with enormous floral arrangements and shimmering chandeliers. The air was thick with expensive perfume and self-congratulation. 200 of my father's biggest fans were there to pay homage to the great Jack. Mike and I found our assigned table, seated in the back by the kitchen doors, of course. A symbolic placement if there ever was one. My brother, Kevin, was at the head table with my parents, glowing. He caught my eye and gave me a little pitying smile that said, "Don't worry, your public humiliation will be over soon." After dinner, the speeches began. Colleagues sang his praises, telling stories of his business genius and ruthless tactics. With every word, my father's chest seemed to swell. Finally, it was his turn. He walked to the stage, beaming. "Wow," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "To see all of you here, it's overwhelming. A man is measured by the company he keeps, and looking out at all of you, I feel like a giant." He thanked his colleagues, his friends, and my mother, the rock upon which I built my life. She dabbed her eyes. Then he looked at my brother. "And to my son, Kevin, you haven't just followed in my footsteps, you forged your own path of excellence. You are my greatest success, my proudest achievement. I love you, son." Kevin raised his glass, a smug grin plastered on his face. Then my father's eyes scanned the room and landed on me. The warmth in his voice vanished. The smile on his face tightened into something cruel. "And then," he said, his voice dripping with theatrical disappointment, "there's my daughter Sarah." He paused for a long, agonizing moment. The room was dead silent. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes turning to me. My cheeks burned with shame. "You know," he continued, addressing the crowd like a jury, "every parent hopes their children will build upon their foundation and soar. Kevin did that. He gestured to my brother. Sarah, she chose to wander off into the weeds. A few people chuckled nervously. I felt Mike's hand find mine under the tablecloth, his grip firm. I've tried, folks, my father said, addressing the crowd like a jury. God knows we've all tried. We gave her every advantage. But some apples, they just fall far from the tree, and, well, they roll into the gutter. A collective gasp went through the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the culmination of a lifetime of snide remarks and pitying looks. He raised his glass. It's an embarrassment, and as I enter this new chapter of my life, a chapter of peace and pride, I have to be honest. I can no longer carry that weight of disappointment. He looked directly at me, his eyes as cold as stone. So, Sarah, as of tonight, I am releasing myself from that burden. You are no longer a part of this family's legacy. You are on your own. I wish you, well. He turned his back on me and raised his glass to the crowd. To the future. The silence was a physical thing, heavier than stone. No one clinked their glass, they just stared, their faces a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. All I could see was my brother's triumphant smirk and my mother staring at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. I felt hollowed out, a ghost at a feast I had paid for. But then, a squeeze on my hand. I looked at Mike. His face was a mask of cold, calm fury. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the silent room. He stood up and began walking toward the stage. Mike, what are you doing? My father said into the mic, annoyed. Sit down. This is a private family moment. Mike didn't stop. He walked right up the steps and took the spare microphone from the lectern. Don't worry, Jack, Mike said, his voice smooth but with an edge of steel that resonated through the ballroom. I'm just here to add a little clarification to your legacy. My father's face darkened. Get off my stage. You're ruining my night. Your night? Mike said with a hollow laugh. Jack, you haven't paid for a single thing in this room. I don't think it's your night to ruin. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. You see, Mike continued, turning to the stunned audience, Jack just gave a very moving speech about success and failure. He painted a picture of his daughter, my wife, Sarah, as a failure, the apple that rolled into the gutter. But there's a funny thing about appearances, isn't there? Mike pulled out his phone. For the past 5 years, Jack's incredible run of success has been a complete and utter fabrication. My father's face went from red to white. You're lying, he sputtered. Slander! I'll sue you for everything you have. Everything I have? Mike said with a chilling smile. Interesting choice of words. Let's talk about what you have, Jack. That beautiful mansion? The mortgage is paid by an anonymous trust. Your Mercedes and your wife's BMW paid in full by that same anonymous entity. And this very party, Mike gestured around the opulent room, down to the last shrimp puff, all of it paid by that same anonymous entity. He paused. We called it the Legacy Trust, and for 5 years it has been the sole source of funding for the life you've been passing off as your own. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering who is the benefactor behind this trust. Mike turned and looked at me, his eyes full of love and righteous anger. It was funded entirely by his failure of a daughter, by the woman he just disowned, by my wife, Sarah. A wave of gasps swept through the room. My father looked like he'd been physically struck. Jack likes to talk about his amazing portfolio, Mike went on, his voice merciless. The giant projector screen behind the stage flickered, now mirroring Mike's phone. At the top were the words, Legacy Trust Management. This is the application I built to manage the trust, Mike announced. It allows me to control every asset, every payment, every dollar that has kept you afloat, Jack. And the beautiful thing about this app is its simplicity. All it takes he said, holding his thumb over a large red button on the screen labeled Execute Protocol, is one single tap. He looked my father dead in the eye. You spoke of releasing a burden, Jack. Allow me to do the same. And then he tapped the screen. The word executed flashed in huge letters on the projector, followed by rapid notifications. Asset liquidation initiated. Mortgage agreement terminated. Vehicle leases canceled. As of right now, Mike announced to the horrified room, the legacy trust has been dissolved. An eviction notice for your home is being filed as we speak. The leasing company has been instructed to repossess their vehicles tomorrow. And most pressingly, Mike gave a small shrug, the hotel has just been notified that the account on file for this party is now empty. The final payment has been declined. For a full 10 seconds, there was silence. Then, chaos. My father's face crumbled. No, you can't. That's my money. It was never your money, Jack. It was a gift. A gift you just spat on in front of 200 people. Just then, the hotel manager strode toward the stage, his face a mask of thunder, whispering furiously in my father's ear. Panic in my father's eyes turned to pure terror. Phones began buzzing all over the room. A guest gasped, "Oh my God, look at this!" and held up his phone. On the screen was a news alert from a major financial publication. Retiring CEO Jack's lavish life a sham, funded by secretly millionaire daughter he publicly disowned. Mike had sent a pre-written press release, complete with documents, to every major news outlet in the city. He had attached receipts. My mother let out a strangled sob. My brother, Kevin, his face purple with rage, scrambled onto the stage and lunged at Mike, screaming, "You bastard! You've ruined us!" Hotel security quickly intercepted and restrained him. My father's boss, the company chairman, slowly stood up. He looked disgusted. He gave my father one last withering look, then turned and walked out. Several other executives followed. The party was over. The legacy was ashes. Mike turned, walked back to me, and held out his hand. "Ready to go, my love?" he asked, as if we were leaving a boring movie. I took his hand and stood up. We didn't run. We walked. We walked right through the imploding crowd, past the gawking guests, past my weeping mother, past my brother Kevin, his face purple with rage, past my father, who was now just a shrunken, pathetic old man standing alone on his stage. As we reached the ballroom doors, I heard his voice, a desperate, cracking plea. "Sarah, wait, please!" We didn't turn around. We just kept walking out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage behind. The days that followed were a storm. The story went viral, a local legend they called the retirement party takedown. My father was a pariah. His company distanced themselves, and his consulting gigs evaporated. The house was sold, the cars repossessed. My parents and my brother, who was also fired, were forced into a small apartment, the rent paid for by what little my brother had left. My phone was a constant assault. 43 missed calls in the first 24 hours, furious texts from Kevin, and one long rambling voicemail from my mother, not apologizing, but begging me to fix this. To her, I wasn't a person who had been hurt. I was a tool that had broken. I listened to that one voicemail, then I blocked their numbers, all of them. The silence was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Mike and I did what we always wanted. We bought land by the ocean, far from the city and its ghosts. We built our own home, filled with light, books, and the sound of the waves. We started a charitable foundation, funding scholarships for underprivileged students in tech. We were building futures, not propping up lies. We were free. About 6 months later, they appeared on our security camera. My father, mother, and brother standing at our front gate, looking small and defeated. Mike stood beside me. "It's your call," he said softly. I pressed the intercom. "Yes?" My father's weak voice answered. Sarah, it's us. Can we just talk to you? I was silent for a moment. The gate is open. We met them on the front porch. They looked older, worn down. My father had lost his arrogant posture. Sarah, I was wrong. What I did, it was monstrous. I was a fool. I was so obsessed with image, I lost sight of what was important. I looked at him, this man who had shaped my life with his casual cruelty, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone, replaced with a vast, calm emptiness. You weren't just wrong, Dad, the word feeling foreign. You were cruel. And it wasn't a one-time mistake. It was my entire life. For 30 years, you made it your mission to make me feel small. That speech wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was the truest thing you've ever said. You stood on a stage and you made a choice. You chose your image over your daughter. And now, I said, my voice clear and steady, you have neither. Goodbye, Jack. I turned, with Mike by my side, and we walked back into our house, closing the door softly. We didn't look back. That was the last time I ever saw my family. Cutting those ties was the hardest and best decision I ever made. I learned that true wealth isn't about numbers in a bank account. It's peace. It's the freedom to be authentically yourself. It's being surrounded by people who celebrate you for who you are, not who they want you to be. My husband and I built that peace from the ground up, and it's a legacy more valuable than any inheritance I was ever denied.